Blaise Pascal writes that the sole cause of man's suffering is his inability to sit quietly in his own room. In our quiet discontent, we leave our room and enter the wide open world. Rather than sitting idle, we are perpetually in motion, seeking out new sights and sounds, novel sensations and states of mind, and enchanting new toys and trinkets. As Robert Nisbet writes, boredom is one of the most insistent and universal forces that has shaped human behaviour. Much of the social world is shaped by the forces of boredom. As the force of gravity intensifies, the greater the mass of the object, the force of boredom crashes down on an individual, the greater number of options that they have available to them. As Barry Schwartz discovered in The Paradox of Choice, as consumer capitalism has exploded like a proverbial big bang, revealing an endless expanse of choices, individuals have not benefited psychologically from this influx of choice, but rather, when faced with a litany of options, we tend to feel more dissatisfied than when we choose from only a few options. This is because when we have more options to choose from, our expectations are inflated, as we come to expect an even greater sense of pleasure. If we can go on vacation to any city in the world, we expect our holiday to be transformative because we have the entire world at our disposal. But when our vacation is limited to our own town or city, our expectations are lowered and we are more likely to find satisfaction in what was previously deemed to be banal and boring. Instead, we have become possessed by the desire to possess more and more, to seek out ever greater novelty and change. As the Danish existentialist philosopher Søren Kierkegaard remarks, one is weary of living in the country and moves to the city. One is weary of one's native land and goes abroad. One is weary of Europe and goes to America. One indulges in fanatical hope of an endless journey from star to star. Or there is another direction, but still extensive. One is weary of eating on porcelain and eats on silver. Weary of that, one eats on gold. One burns down half of Rome in order to visualise the Trojan conflagration. This method cancels itself and is this spurious infinity without placing restraints on the individual and on what Iris Murdoch called the fat, relentless ego. We've been left to our own devices to find meaning in our lives, and in the process, we have tried to live a life of boundless hedonism alone. We have tried to fill the existential void with ephemeral pleasures, only to find ourselves invariably returned to a sense of emptiness. As Kierkegaard notes, how terrible is tedium, how terribly tedious. I know no stronger expression, none truer, for like is all that like knows. If only there were a higher expression, a stronger one, then at least there would still be a movement. I lie stretched out, inert. All I see is emptiness. All I live on is emptiness. All I move in is emptiness. I do not even suffer pain. At least the vulture kept on pecking Prometheus's liver, but even pain has lost its power to refresh me. Consumer culture, coupled with an ever-growing hunger for instant gratification, has left us perpetually seeking new sensations and pleasures to fill a much deeper void in our life. Boredom, like hunger, is an aversive signal, signalling that an important need is not being fulfilled, and that this is the need for personal meaning in our life. Personal meaning cannot be found in the frenzied pursuit of fleeting pleasure, because pleasure ultimately wilts and disappoints. In an attempt to feel something, we have become addicted to social media, online dating, drinking, drugs, and the pursuit of cheap validation from strangers, simply because we cannot stand ourselves and because we cannot stand to be by ourselves. Modernity and the indulgence of Western 21st century living is deepening our sense of boredom and bringing the worst out of the individual. We are becoming more individualistic and narcissistic as we stand on the shoulders of previous generations and secure prestigious careers and large social media followings, while feeling like a little tin pot self-made god, all the while ignoring that it was our ancestors who brought about the very conditions for our individual success. Modern decadence is a matter of diverting our attention towards what glitters and sparkles, while alienating us from the deepest and darkest questions that motivate the human condition. As Pat Buchanan declares in The Death of the West, is the death of a religious-based culture inevitable once a society reaches general affluence, when a nation has overcome the hardships of infancy and the struggles of its adolescence and manhood, and begins to produce a life of ease and luxury? Does it naturally succumb to a disease of the soul that leads to decadence, decline, and death? Whether our civilizations outlive their gods is a question for another time, but what is apparent is that we are in dire need for self-restraint, given that the institutions that once restrained us are a mere afterthought. In this manner, Kierkegaard pours light on how we can exercise greater restraint, or what Aristotle called temperance. Kierkegaard notes, in his analogy of crop rotation, that the method I propose does not consist in changing the soil, but like proper crop rotation, consists in changing the method of cultivation and the kinds of crops. Here at once is the pinnacle of limitation, the sole saving principle in the world. The more a person limits himself, the more resourceful he becomes. A solitary prisoner for life is extremely resourceful. To him, a spider can be a source of great amusement. What a meticulous observer one becomes, detecting every little sound or movement. Here is the extreme boundary of that principle that seeks relief, not through extensity, but through intensity. We exhaust the soil of its natural vitality by cultivating crops without restraint and not allowing the soil to lay fallow. Similarly, without acting in moderation in regards to pleasure, we exhaust ourselves on pleasure until it raises our lifeless body no more, but rather, by limiting our sensation-seeking tendencies and delaying gratification, we serve not only to stave off boredom, but to intensify the pleasures that we do feel. It is only through limitation and temperance that we can hope to live a good life. In a seminal study conducted in the 1960s by Walter Mischel, called the Marshmallow Experiment, he tested hundreds of young children by placing each child in a private room, accompanied by only a single marshmallow placed on the table. The researchers then offered each child a deal. If the child refrained from eating the marshmallow while the researchers briefly left the room, the child would be rewarded with a second marshmallow. But if the child ate the first marshmallow, there would be no second one. In Walter Mischel's follow-up to this simple study, he found that children who did not cave in and waited for the researcher to return before eating their marshmallow were more successful in almost all areas of life. They scored higher on standardised tests, were healthier, reported better to stress, had fewer substance abuse issues, and demonstrated better social skills later on in life. In a follow-up study conducted by researchers at the University of Rochester, they replicated the marshmallow experiment with their own twist. They split children into two groups prior to the marshmallow test. For the first group, researchers promised crayons and stickers and other similar rewards, but the rewards never materialised. For the second group, the rewards materialised as promised, and the children in the first group struggled with delayed gratification because they'd been conditioned to believe that the rewards wouldn't actually occur if they were to delay eating their marshmallow. Indeed, they had no reason to wait, since evidence had never been given to cause them to trust the researcher. Importantly, this highlights a key insight into the nature of delayed gratification, and for those of us working to embrace delayed gratification as a life skill, we can clearly see that there are valuable lessons to be learned from these children. Indeed, the children who received prizes as promised had unknowingly trained their brains to believe that 1, they were capable of delayed gratification, and 2, that delayed gratification was worth the wait. Their ability to postpone pleasure was not predetermined or genetic, it was a learned behaviour. That means we can train ourselves to delay gratification in a number of different situations. In an age where we are buffeted by a storm of sensory stimuli, where every major organisation is intent on capturing as much of your attention as possible and selling it to the highest bidder, in a world where sex, drugs, food and gratification lay at our fingertips, we are left to ourselves to ward off boredom and to become more resilient in the face of innumerable temptations. In the pursuit of pleasure, we must reward ourselves sensibly and moderately. If we wish to become more than a passive consumer in a world of indulgence and decadence, we must walk the harsh and enduring path towards our long-term goals if we wish to find fulfillment in our lives. And this entails focusing our minds on less and not more, and deepening our conscious engagement with the world. For pleasure ultimately disappoints, but purpose does not. If you've liked this video and want to see more videos on how philosophy can help us study society, then please share, subscribe and like the video. Thank you.